Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to see you. It's been a week since we had a wee chat. Hope you and yours are well. Can I just say to all of those that I met to air last week, lovely meeting you all. Great fun, some great stories, and although it was blowing a hoolie, it was a great turnout considering all things. And it was nice to see you, and we'll hopefully see you in a few more of these trips and live Prism shows over the coming weeks and months. Anyway, on to this week. Another hectic week, and I've got the whole crew here to help me out. Let's start over there in North Dakota with your man, the Coatbridge Cavalier himself.
Howdy, Roddy.
How do you do? Nice to see you, my friend, as always. Where are you today? Anything exciting to tell us?
Yeah, I'm at Wee Fest, which is a country and western festival. So, yeah, I know. So I had the cowboy hat on and the jeans and everything, the cowboy boots last night. But tonight I'll be wearing a kilt and a cowboy hat. The boots just don't work with a kilt, but it just doesn't work. And we're actually in Minnesota. So we're at the lake house in Minnesota.
It's a loch, mate. It's a loch.
The loch house, it's like they just look at you and go.
Right, excellent. Look, send us photographs of the kilt and the cowboy hat.
Oh, I'll definitely do that. I'll do that.
Oh, I got to do that. And they're over in Edinburgh, our new inducted Lloyd Quinnan. Right. Now he's got his own doll. He's inducted into the group. He's fully fledged. Lloyd, my friend, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Roddy. Just wee shade angry with this week's events, but there we go.
Well, yeah, we've had angry Phil, we've had angry Yvonne. Now we're going to get an angry Lloyd. We'll love it. We'll love it. And it's just as well in that case that we've got our lawyer in the house from Clickmannanshire. Lawyers, the favourite lawyer of Clickmannanshire and beyond. Our Eva. Eva, my friend, how are you?
Hi, Roddy. Well, pleased to say that wee Lloyd had an outing last night to Perth and a couple of days earlier in Glenrothes. So it's all good, but he's back up there in his place on the shelf again. Really.
Yeah. See, the kids have got that thing at Christmas. What's it? They put in the shelf, the elf in the shelf. We've got the Lloyd in the void. There's what we got. We got that, yeah. And not forgetting down there in the borders, it's our Yvonne, our Barbie, our Shirley Temple, whatever she is this week. We don't know. We don't care. We've got her here anyway. That's all that matters. How are you?
I'm feeling really good and quite upbeat today.
No, that's good. And you're going to be in your best behaviour, or
That's what I've got to be upbeat about with all the crap that's swirling around.
Yeah,
but
that's
good.
No, okay, that was a start to pretend that you answered my question with that. You answered my question, but it has been a heck of a week, and it is a week to be angry and annoyed. Phil, calling you Floyd, Phil, with it finally happened. We all expected it to happen. It broke, we don't agree with it, but our Margaret's been replaced, and the vultures didn't spend much time before they were out there on the streets. Sad day.
Yeah, yes, and I know Margaret very well, obviously, having worked with her as a foot soldier and also down in Westminster for a bit. Margaret made a mistake and was rightly criticised for it, but why is she the only one to be removed from office, And note the method of removal through this new system that was a petition to recall an MP from her seat in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. This has been introduced, I think it was 2015, and it was all you need is a required number of signatures, which is 10% of the electorate, and you can remove a politician. Now, tell me in any constituency where you cannot get 10% of the voters or constituents to remove a politician. This is a mechanism that the establishment put all these mechanisms in place and use them when it suits on who they want this imposed upon. This tool of the establishment And to see the evidence of that, all we have to is look at this. I saw an article that was interested, and I thought it fascinating. Obviously, we saw Lib Dem leader Alex Cole-Hamilton facing calls to step down because he didn't receive special dispensation to hold a public meeting, right? Which tracked COVID regs. What about Antonia Stats travelled from across London to lockdown? Dominic Cummings' infamous drive. Stephen Kinnock, the parents' birthday party. Catherine Calderwood. Nicola said she should stay in place even though she broke the rules. Robert Jenrick, the parental visit. Michael Gove, the maskless in public. Michael Gove. Jeremy Corbyn, dinner party for 9 during COVID restrictions. Gavin Williamson, drinks and canapes. Boris's Christmas parties and maskless in a hospital with NHS staff all PP'd up. And finally, Matt Hancock and his advisor in that embrace. So, why is it just Margaret that's being picked out? The answer? She's the fall guy, and the establishment is picking her out because she's standing again. She's someone that Nicola throws under the bus, and Nicola, in her keenness to be part of the establishment and kowtow to the establishment, it's backfired on her personally, but not before she. And let's face it, I put the blame firmly, squarely upon her and the woke brigade that took over SNP for the temporary disruption of the unity that is the freedom of our country and our people, because that will unite us, does unite us. And if we get rid of these people who are not in it for that, I guarantee we will recover and we will get it back. So thankfully, Nicola's paying a price for this. But it's the damage that she's done to our cause and the delay that she's added to our freedom and us gaining our freedom, I cannot forgive her for. So, no, Margaret's been picked out because... well, that's just how it works when you take on the establishment. And Nicola was very much part of the establishment when she put our good friend down.
Lloyd, it just does show the absolute lack of political nous of Sturgeon and her replacement, her apprentice, Mr. Yousaf. Because when the polls are turning against you, I mean, they're in effect, they're almost gifting this seat to one of the unionist parties and giving them hope. It was tactically also stupid.
I think it's tactically stupid if you truly believed in having the maximum number of members of the Westminster Parliament as part of your process to achieve the independence of our country. But you could look at it through the other end of the telescope, and I think what it looks like, and it looks like to me, is Margaret Seat's the first one to sacrifice. And I don't think, I mean, apart from being utterly disgusted at the way in which someone who gave so much to the party has been treated, and then again, she's not alone in that, she's just the most public figure in the persecution. But in reality, does this open the door for when they lose the seat, which inevitably they will, does that then open the door for the devolutionists to say people are not ready? The country's not ready. They've just proved that in a by-election. If they came out and they voted for us, then they'd be supporting the SNP and they'd be supporting independence. I mean, these are all things that are now in the mix. But it is, without doubt, the most politically naive event I've seen in the past few months. Certainly, there's been a few, but this one where you're sliding in the polls, as Phil and yourself have said, the independence is flying. You would resist this. You would resist this completely. Why do you want to have an election right in the Glasgow heartland a year before a general election, bucking up the Labour Party if they win it, which they probably will? Why would you do that? It makes no sense whatsoever from a political intelligence point of view. But then again, I think we've discussed long and hard enough over the past few months that political smarts are not quite at a premium at the top of the Scottish National Party at the moment. Indeed, some people would say, and I'd be one of them, is, have these people ever been in politics before? Do they understand the movements of the balances? Do they understand when you put the accelerator down and when you put the brake on? And to me, they appear to have no understanding. What I think is curious, though, is Kevin Pringle's back in the saddle. what is going on? Kevin Pringle doesn't make mistakes like this. Kevin Pringle's never made a mistake like this in his entire career. He was, a very firm part of the governments that were delivered in the earlier part of the century under Alex Salmond, both the minority and the majority government. I cannot imagine for the life of me why Kevin Pringle would be suggesting that this is the smart way to proceed.
Maybe he is being silenced. I mean, has he been isolated? Does he have no influence in what's going on? Do you think, Lloyd?
I not for a second would I say that Kevin Pringle can be silenced by the children in the kindergarten at the moment. I mean, come on, he's the only one with any real experience, any real political nous, and a track record of it. I think, this is why I said it's a mystery. It's confusing me, because if he was being silenced, the first thing he would do would be to tell the world he was being silenced, which he's done before. So I really don't understand this. I don't understand it at all.
Perhaps it's the fact that it was so far down the line when he came in that he really couldn't prevent it, that already the die had been cast, so to speak.
Maybe, Roddy, but there were other ways of going about this. They didn't have to go gung-ho behind the Labour Party's moves to have Margaret removed.
Correct.
They could have quietly stood to the side, taken no part in it, or they could have, which was the right alternative, is to run the media campaign that says, but this woman did the following. Because when you compare her stats to the previous incumbent, Jed Killen, she spoke, she took part in Parliament, she represented her constituents in a ratio of round about 3 to 1. She has a track record of delivering for the people. Now, that could have been, if the process had begun, but you wanted the process to fail, then surely you run a campaign, quiet through the media, on social media as well, where you point out the positive elements of Margaret's tenure, of which there are many. There's no shortage. They could have used their many media outlets to point people in the direction of speaking to the political correspondents in television and radio and so on. There's no question there are things could have been done to mitigate this, because in real terms, as Phil said, getting 10% of any constituency, 10% of people who either support one political party in an entrenched kind of a manner, it's the easiest thing in the world to do if that is your aim. But if you are the sitting party and you are carrying out a campaign to retain that person, then it's very easy for you to be able to prevent the 10%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. It's quite, it's quite annoying. But the other thing, once they get into this position, Eva, they're kind of forced into it. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It was too far down the road. They couldn't turn back. They didn't, whatever. But anyway, they're in that position. Surely now, Scotland United is the way. We've discussed it in this show so many times. 50% plus are in favour of independence, 39 to 37% are in favour of the SNP. There's a 13% gap. We go back to Kevin Pringle. He's not a daft chap. Surely someone should be saying to them in their hoomser, pick up that bloody phone. It's the only way to do it is with a Scotland United campaign.
Well, as I think for shorthand now, you've started something, Roddy. We're going to refer to the lads here as the Floyds. As the Floyds have already said, there's something wrong when 10% of the electorate loses somebody their seat. But in this particular instance, 14% voted for Margaret to lose her seat, which means 86% did not. And I think that stat on its own speaks volumes. In addition to that, when Margaret was re-elected, because obviously she'd been the MP before, lost a seat to Labour, won it back again. When she was re-elected in 2019, her vote was almost 24,000. It was 44% of the vote. Labour, Ged Killen, was 18.5 at 34%. We know now in the polls that the SNP are probably sitting around about the 30% mark or so. I suspect the local polling is even worse than this, and that may explain why in recent days, when there have been attempts to interview somebody from the SNP in that constituency, every piece of media that I've seen, bar one, has involved an interview of Humza Yousaf, with the candidate standing or sitting behind him. In one instance, at a radio interview, Humza was sitting at the table at the mic, being interviewed by the host. David Linden was standing at the back door, and in the corner, which was really quite saying something, was the candidate herself. Well, do you seriously believe for one moment that if, say, I was the candidate for Alba there and Alex Salmond was there too, do you think I'd be standing in the corner? There's something seriously wrong. That was one of the interviews. The other one was very similar insofar as it was only Humza that was allowed to speak. The candidate didn't get to speak. When I did see her speak on the telly the other night, she was outside in the street and she was asked, is Nicola Sturgeon an asset to the party? And her response was, I'm standing on our record. So she was asked again, is Nicola an asset to the party or a liability? I'm standing on our record. And when she was asked for the third time, the police car drove past behind her. And she said, well, I'm not in charge of Nicola's diary. So I think there might be some media training issues there. And that's as good a reason as any for considering Scotland United. Because if the SNP nationally are sitting on about 30%, in that constituency, with the performance of that candidate so far, they're not that high. And if that constituency is to be retained as one with an independent supporting MP, it can only happen with a Scotland United agreement and one robust, capable candidate who nobody is afraid to put forward front-facing to the media and where nobody's alarmed about what gaffes they might commit when they've been interviewed, perhaps unexpectedly, or if they're not properly prepared. But you see, the real reason why they had it in for Margaret Ferrier in the SNP is really because once she sat as an independent, she continued to work very assiduously and was in Westminster most days. She participated often in debates. She asked numerous questions. She did a really good job representing her constituents, put in far more effort than most of her colleagues. But she committed a cardinal sin because she was one of the people who supported Neil Hanvey's self-determination bill. And those are obviously Neil, Kenny McCaskill, Joanna Cherry, Angus Brendan McNeill, Douglas Chapman and Margaret Ferrier. These are the people who put their name to that bill. And as soon as they did that, they knew the writing was on the wall with the SNP, because there's nobody in the current or the previous SNP leadership that could sanction that and allow it to go unnoticed. So by standing up for country before party, Margaret Ferrier was damned. That's her biggest mistake. It's not the COVID era, because she's paid an awful price, quite apart from losing her job. She's been prosecuted, she's been convicted, she's been sentenced, she's carried out the penalties imposed upon her by the court. This is double jeopardy, which in very few other walks of life would be allowed to happen. You know, you're prosecuted, you're convicted, you're penalised, and normally that's the end of it. You don't also go on to be publicly shamed over and over again and to have your ability to earn a living taken away from you unexpectedly. That shows you just how brutal they are in the SNP, that they actively promoted that position against a woman who had helped to get most of them elected and had assisted in practically every election, including local authority elections in Scotland for decades. That's what commitment and dedication to today's SNP leadership gets you. And I think you'll find in the grassroots of the SNP a huge amount of support for Margaret and actually a lot of shame about the way that she's been treated. So we know you were asking about Scotland United. That's 4 meetings that we've done open to the public in the last 2 weeks. Scotland United has been debated at every one of them, and without exception, the audience has been full square, 4 square behind the notion of Scotland United, because they understand this is a bit like 2014. When the referendum was called, we were sitting at around about 28, 29% support for independence. The SNP was higher, it was nearer 50%. The roles are reversed now. The SNP's around about 30, support for independence is more or less at the halfway mark, if not higher. So the only way we get independence is by harnessing every independent support and vote. not by remaining party-oriented. And that's the mistake that the SNP are making. And they've got the chance to correct that within the next few days and to agree a Scotland United position with a robust candidate who's articulate and has the ability to speak for Scotland.
Yvonne, it was kind of, the announcement hadn't been made more than an hour or so, and both the SNP and the Labour Party were already on the streets of Rutherglen getting photo opportunities. It was really quite, it left a horrible taste in the mouth. It certainly did for me. How did you find it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, they were dancing on Margaret Ferriers' political grave. And this candidate that they've got, I'll call her Karen, I keep forgetting her name, but she is a bit of a Karen. She actually campaigned to help get Margaret Ferrier elected. And she, you know, was out knocking on the doors, persuading people to vote for Margaret Ferrier. And now she's back on the doors, persuading people to vote for her. And why anybody would want to vote for such a nasty little backstabbing bint is beyond me, because she's really shown a true character. Margaret Ferrier has kept a dignified silence throughout. I can't wait for the moment when somebody puts a microphone at her mouth and she does start to speak. But she's maintained this dignified silence. And Eva's right, you know, she's gone through this double, triple jeopardy. I mean, she's like that character in Game of Thrones who was made to walk through the streets, ringing the bell, shouting shame. I mean, this is what they've done to her. They've prosecuted her and then they've persecuted her. And the sisterhood in the SNP is non-existent because nobody has come to her aid. A lesser person might have contemplated something really dark. You know, she's been really driven to the outer fringes of the SNP. And I think it's deplorable that any individual could be persecuted in such a nasty, vicious way as Margaret Ferrier has. And, you know, the people of Rutherglen are a decent lot. I think it took quite some time to find 12,000 of them prepared to bang in a political nail into our coffin. But I think that the people of Rutherglen, they're the ones I feel sorry for, having these backstabbing, duplicitous, treacherous no-marks from the SNP and Labour banging on their door, asking them to vote for them. Why on earth would anyone vote for such a rotten lot? The people of Rutherglen need a champion. At the moment, they've got a load of transphobic activists banging on their door. And what I would urge the people of Rutherglen to do is, when these lot come wanting them to vote, is just to ask a simple question: what is a woman? And if they can't answer the question, bang the door shut and wait until you get somebody coming on your doorstep who can talk a little bit of sense. And it's, I would point to what's going on down in Brighton at the moment, where the comedian Eddie Izzard has announced that he will be running to become the Labour MP for Brighton Pavilion. And the media are falling into this nonsense circus and calling Eddie Izzard, she will run here, she's going to do this, she posted Brighton Pavilion. I'm very excited to announce that I'm standing to be your next Labour MP. Well, fine, but somebody needs to tell Eddie Izzard that he isn't a woman, he'll never be a bloody woman, and he's a man. You know, let's just get some common sense. And yet not one of the candidates at the moment who've declared, you know, that they're going to stand, not one can answer what is a woman. And the people of Rutherglen deserve far much more than the trash that they've got at the moment. You know, there's not one of them worthy of stepping into Margaret Ferriers' shoes.
You were saying that they needed a champion. They had a champion in Margaret. I mean, Margaret was an exception to most MPs, hardworking, full of integrity, decency, nice woman. If anybody you've ever met her, you know what a nice woman she is. Despicable. And Phil, you mentioned quite a lot of the people, you know, Boris and Rishi and all those others attending parties, but there was one closer to home, and that was Alex Cole-Hamilton, who had a COVID outdoor meeting. And he got caught lying. I know they use words like mistruth or misquoted. Lying through his teeth that he'd been given a special dispensation. And that was exposed by the Edinburgh Reporter this week to a load of nonsense. But nothing's going to happen to him. He's a member of one of the British parties. He's as safe as houses.
Yes, well, that just proves, it just indicates and proves the point that he's one of that list that I gave earlier of those who will not be persecuted is the proper word, by utilisation of this new mechanism that was introduced. Again, it's another tool that the British establishment can use when it suits its purposes. And its purposes is to do down the cause of independence and those that stand for it. The reason that they went along with Nicola and are going along with Humza so much just now is because they don't pose the threat. Nicola and Humza did not and do not pose the threat to the union. They really don't. They're exactly the right people you would want in charge of the SNP if you were a unionist. Now, thankfully, and a lot of the unionists are too thick to realise that one. And I'm not saying that unionists are thick, because there's some extremely intelligent people there, and they're running rings around the independence campaign at the moment. They are winning. They are winning, but they're just staying off the inevitable. We will when our eyes are opened properly and enough of us cotton on to the fact that we've been sold down the Swanee by Nicola and her ilk, then the SNP will get its house in order. It will rise again. Now, I don't really care whether it succeeds or fails as a party. If its prime directive is Scottish independence, then I'll back it 100%. If it is now what it appears to be devolution, then it deserves to die on its own sword, to fall on its own sword. And they should be open about it and be honest. So no surprises that Alex Cole-Hamilton will walk scot-free, as will the rest of them. The fact that this is another way to damage the independence cause, and this is what the establishment are doing, and there's not a lot we can do it.
No, Lloyd, the Alba party have decided they've given the SNP 3 weeks to agree to a Scotland United candidate before they make their final decision. However, we heard today that the ISP are standing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's naive. They're not well enough known outside of the edges of the movement. I think they're nice people. I think they mean well, but I think it could be a disastrous intervention for them. It will be financially costly, but it could also be costly ideologically for them too. I don't think they will get the platform that they expect to get from running in the by-election. And I personally would urge them to think twice before making their decision. I know from the statement they made today that they haven't as yet selected a candidate, and I would suggest to them that they should think twice, because this could be far more damaging to them in their kind of early period, their growing up period, for want of a better description. They could damage themselves very badly, and that's not good for the movement. If it takes anybody out of the front line of the movement for independence, then it's not a good thing. I believe in the plurality, but I also believe in facing electoral realities. And if you have limited funds, limited membership, you can't afford to lose a deposit and run a by-election campaign. By-election campaigns much more expensive than a general election campaign. You're up against, bigger battalions than you are in a general election campaign, and I would urge caution. I think it's my best way to describe it, because I think a precipitous action like this by them could be extremely damaging for them, and I think that would be a shame. And I would urge them not to do it. I would urge them to stand behind the Scotland United ticket if such a thing can come to pass. But the biggest blockage to that, as we all know, is the Scottish National Party, who appear to be operating on the basis of managed decline of number of seats. How long that strategy will run for, we won't really know. It will probably run until it starts to hurt some of the people that are in the cabinet or some of the people in senior leadership positions. Then there'll be a sharp brake put on the management of decline. But for the ISP, please don't do it. Wait for Scotland United.
There is also a thought, Eva. As I say, the Alpha Party are waiting a couple of weeks before they finally announce if they're going to run or not, and won't preempt that on here. But there is a thread that's saying we should all, not just the ISP, but everyone should stand back and just let the SNP face this one on their own. And maybe that will give them the wake-up call that going into the next year's general election, that they see that they cannot win it on their own and that they do need a Scotland United. It's a kind of between a rock and a hard place for everyone, isn't it, in the independence movement?
This is known as the alternative stew in your own juice theory. And there's a lot to be said for it. Because obviously if Alba or the ISP or any other independent supporting party stands to take some of the vote and the SNP lose, it wouldn't matter the margin by which the SNP lose. It'll be the smaller parties that get the blame for their loss. That seat shouldn't be up for grabs, as I've already said. But if it were to be, it's naturally an independent seat because of the way that the polls work on the application for Margaret. The current candidate cannot win it on her own. It might be a good thing if there were a bloody nose delivered to the SNP here, because they might then waken up to the reality of the positive benefit of a Scotland United campaign. Because if they lose this seat now, and there's a general election within a year or so of now, you really wonder how many more seats they're going to lose. And yet their continuing campaign, their continuity campaign, seems to be that if they win a majority of seats in Westminster, somehow that comprises some sort of mandate. Perish the thought, but perhaps they'll argue that it's a mandate for another referendum and another Section 30. I wouldn't put that past them. I don't think anybody would. But I cannot, for the life of me, see how they could claim that winning a majority of seats, which can be done on 30-odd% of the vote, can by any stretch of the imagination be used on the international stage to somehow legitimise attempts to negotiate an independence settlement. To do that and to have that legitimacy and that recognition and support internationally, one would normally expect to have won more than 50% of the popular vote. That's attainable with a good campaign, a strong wind, and stout hearts all devoted to a Scotland United campaign. It won't happen if we just have the usual partisan party politics. So if the SNP won't come to the table now, if they won't sensibly negotiate the positive benefits of Scotland United, they run the risk that everybody else, including the ISP, does stand back and say, well, get on with it. Other words, hell mend you. Labour will wipe the floor with them, and that might bring common sense to bear. I'm not particularly optimistic, though, because when you listen to some of the mantras that the SNP now use, it's becoming beyond embarrassing to see some of the stuff that they're coming out with. And a really major regret for me is The SNP obviously want to continue to pursue their gender recognition reform agenda. They don't acknowledge the valid concerns of women, and we've seen that on innumerable occasions recently. The Labour candidate supports the gender recognition reform bill, even although that is no longer Keir Starmer's position. So you're in the ridiculous set of circumstances that the Labour candidate, if elected, will go to Westminster claiming that he's going to oppose Keir Starmer's view on gender recognition reform. So he's going to be elected on behalf of Labour to go to Westminster to argue with Labour, ridiculous class and beyond. So I really would have liked to have seen a strong candidate supportive of women's rights and supportive of the views of the majority of the population who oppose self-identification, because that would have been a good thing to add on to a Scotland United campaign and try to reunite Scotland and get the women's vote, because the women's vote really matters, and it's not going to the SNP, and I doubt very much whether it will go to this Labour candidate for those very reasons.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Eva. It's bizarre times. But Yvonne, where do you sit on this one? Do you think we should let them stew in their own juice, or should we keep pressing them to see the light and do a Scotland United?
By-elections are very strange beasts. With the right conditions, amazing things can happen. And I remember George Galloway turning up in Bradford at the train station with one advisor and nobody else, no funds, absolutely nothing. And he declared that he was going to stand in Bradford West, and he won. And that was because of a perfect range of circumstances. And, you know, he is, like Amal Otham, he's a larger-than-life character, and he captured the imagination of the town, and he won. And it was an astonishing victory, which has not been bettered since at any by-election. But strange things can happen. And it is, you know, a very unpredictable seat because of, we were up there for Eva's roadshow, the Equalities Roadshow, and people are mightily hacked off at the way their democratically elected MP has been treated by her own party and by other parties. Nobody likes to see any individual, especially somebody like Margaret Ferrier, being pummeled into the ground. It was just awful. You know, it was an act of cowardice by the SNP. The ISP, bless them, you know, they're punching above their weight, and they do have good intentions, but if they really want to be taken seriously, then they have to get into the ranks of Scotland United. They can't do this alone. And they won't even split the vote, because realistically, they're not even going to get much of a vote. So whether they stood or not isn't going to make that much of a difference. And I know that will outrage and crush the sensibilities of those in the independence movement. But we haven't got time for Jackanory now. You know, we have to deal with the reality. We have to deal with the hand that we've got. And, you know, I just wish that the SNP would see the common sense of what we're doing. You know, I don't know who's advising Humza Yousaf at the moment, but all I see is a replay of Harry Kane standing in front of that goal, taking the penalty for England. You know, and it's just replacing with Humza. Scotland
Yeah, I remember
United.
that moment well. Yeah, I remember it as the ball went over the bar.
Well,
it
it's
makes
still up
5.2
there.
million Scots very happy, though, Yvonne. You've got to look on the positive side every time.
But this is the position Hunza is in. And yet, if he had gone for Scotland United, he would have been in a win-win position.
Yeah.
But he didn't, he's standing there like a one-legged man about to take a penalty.
I couldn't describe it better. You're right, because if he goes Scotland United, then he can blame Scotland United, and they can take the rap for the failure. But he's not even wise enough to do that one.
That's right.
But here's the thing, Phil. Never before has there been a better case for independence. Techie, can you put up the crisis of confidence? This was a poll that was carried out this week throughout the UK, but in Scotland in particular. And it said that only something like 12% of people, Phil, think that things will get better in the next 5 years. 63% of Scots think inside the Union it's going to get worse. Now, everything is right for independence if we pull the act together and get rid of things like bottled deposit scheme, the GRR, hate crime bill, and focus on one thing only. Because the public are telling us in poll after poll they support independence. This new poll telling us that they think the UK is a busted flush. Surely a time for sense, Phil.
Yeah, and a time for allies and allying yourself with winners. When we're now seeing the demise of what was traditionally the Western powers, it doesn't mean it doesn't follow the Roman Empire for the Americans or for the Europeans, but certainly we're on the wane, particularly with the rise of what we're seeing with BRICS plus 20. That is going to blow us away. But yeah, this poll was commissioned by ALBA. 63.8% of Scottish adults expect life to be shit in the next 5 years, worse than it was up to now, and with only 12% saying they think it's going to get better. And about, I think, a quarter of them said they would things remain pretty much the same. But the indicators are all there, have been for quite some time. What about the shit show that is Brexit? I mean, we've still to really pay the full price of this. And look at interest rates, balance of payments, debt levels, various other indicators. We're heading towards a serious and severe economic recession. Proxy war with the Russians is damaging our people, our economy, and it's the poor that pay the price, not the billionaires that are making money off war, and the theft that goes along with that. So it should surprise nobody that at this time of downturn in European economic prospects, that Britain will now actually watch people, just pay attention, because it's going to be harder and harder for Britain to cover up the impacts of the economically suicidal Brexit plan, success for the right wing, and watch for the poorest in our communities paying that price. It's absolutely appalling. People know it. What are we going to do about it, folks? That's the big question. And this is where Scotland United comes in. This is where there's nothing worse than willful blindness. Nothing worse. If you choose to ignore the SNP under their current leadership are failing us, along with the rest of the union parties, and that what we need is to free our people in our country, then well, I hope you reassess the situation and trust what you see happening before your eyes, because it's going to get very, very painful, folks. And for those of us who are most vulnerable, where's your compassion? Where's your humanity? Where's your Scottishness?
Yeah. At the same time, Lorna, in 2014, you'll remember it well, we had Serene Wood and every unionist and Tory you could speak and stand in front of a camera saying, yeah, the Scottish oil, it's running out, it's too volatile, it'll be finished in 5-10 years. And here we are in 2023, Grant Snaps this week announced, can you put up the paper there, Techie, that they're going to max out the North Sea for oil and gas. It's the saviour of the British economy to get us through austerity, all this lovely oil and gas. The hypocrisy and the lies are all coming home.
Absolutely. But at the same time as we're having this, we're having the Scottish National Party telling us that, yes, we should shut down the North Sea. Yes, that we must take our responsibility in the world. And when you actually look at the figures, what Scotland produces, and particularly the emissions we produce, are negligible. You know, it's 1 day in India per year, effectively, is what we're producing. Where have we got to where people don't understand that we have social problems which are now multi-generational in our country, that are getting increasingly worse? Poverty levels are rising. Homelessness is rising. Our NHS is under huge, enormous pressures, despite the fact that we operate quite well compared with many other places. But where are people thinking? How is it that we will sacrifice the people that we've already sacrificed? We're going to sacrifice another generation of them to meet targets which will make literally or negligible effects on the whole issue of the issue of greenhouse gases and global warming, which of course is still a disputed concept in real terms. We have to get back to realizing that the natural resources of our country belong to the people, and it is the people of the country who decide what happens with the natural resources, not the middle class politicians who've read the green pamphlet and want to virtue signal their way to a job in Europe or the United Nations. We have a responsibility. Politicians in this country have a responsibility to the people of this country, first and foremost. It is the primary directive of any politician in Scotland that they do all they possibly can to improve the lot of every single member of the community of the realm. That's just a reality. Unfortunately, we seem to have a collection of politicians on the union side. We know that they don't have that. Their belief in is the creation of the Greater Britain over and over again. On our side, how come we have an entire generation of politicians who have lost sight of what the primary objective of being in politics is, which is to improve the lives of your people? And the greatest improvement that could be made in the lives of our people in the short, medium and long term is the achievement of national freedom. Scotland taking its place in the world, but more importantly than taking their place in the world, allowing our people to take their place in the world by giving them the leg up they need in education, in work, employment, environment, all of the things that need to be addressed, which we sweep under the carpet at the moment as part of the United Kingdom. We want to have constitutional fights over how we deal with our drug problem. These things are irrelevant. We need to address the problems directly. And the only way you can address those problems directly is when the saltire flies outside the United Nations building in New York. And some of our people need to waken up to this and waken up to it quick. People, this is not hyperbolic. People are dying in our country unnecessarily. And that's the important word, unnecessarily.
Yeah, it is. I was watching a programme, people following along. There's been a coup in Niger, and they were interviewing a guy in the street, just an ordinary guy, and he said to him, and he was so happy. He said, he said, the resources we've got oil and we've got diamonds, but we've got the real big one they've got is uranium. He says, but France gets 95% of that benefit. We're slaves. We're poor. Our country's impoverished. We only get 5%. And I went, yeah, I know what you're talking about, mate. I've got similar. It's different natural resources, but it's an imperial colonial mindset that's taken away from my people. We get 8.2, or is it 8.93% we get? Well, England has to get by 91 point, whatever it is, of Scotland's resources. But Eva, the other thing, there was someone threw some of these oil people, stop oil, threw red paint or orange paint or something on the Holyrood. But here's the thing, I've seen some so-called sensible people like Richard Murphy, the tax man, a very clever man, writing articles with, yes, we've got to stop oil, it's got to stop. But then I put it out, do you know, people seem to think, a lot of people think that from oil and gas, and I'll bring Phil in this because I know it says a hobby horse, that you get fuel for your car, fuel for your plane and your boats, and that's it. There are 6,000 items, things like syringes, medical devices, all sorts of things you get from oil. You look around your house today, there's not many things that are not a derivative of oil. And this nonsense about get rid of it, just stop it, is just idiocy. That's the best way I can put it, Eva.
Well, I'll defer to Phil in a minute. I wanted, though, to come in relation to the people who were throwing the paint at the doorway of Holyrood, because there were 4 people arrested for this. And one of them was a young woman who's an art student who was in custody overnight on Tuesday. And when she appeared in court on Wednesday, her lawyer said it had been a terrible experience for her, very distressing, having been in custody, and that really to continue in custody wasn't for her. But she was remanded in custody because it transpired that this young lady was already on 4 separate bail orders for 4 separate but similar offences. And a little investigation into her circumstances and those of her 3 co-accused strongly suggests that they're all students in Scotland, but their domiciles are with their parents down in Middle England. And one
Really?
they feel that the protests have to occur in Edinburgh, when they could have so easily taken their protests elsewhere, perhaps nearer to their holiday homes, shall we say, as opposed to the term time residences. So this particular young woman, who must now be on 5 bail orders, had her case continued to appear in court the following day to see whether she was a suitable candidate to be released on supervised or monitored bail conditions. Might I suggest that if you're going to vandalise the Scottish Parliament and you think you're entitled to do that, it might look a bit off if the solicitor you instruct to act for you is the one who, when she was herself an elected Glasgow City Councillor, objected to women posting stickers and suffragette ribbons. There's something terribly karmic about that episode. So on that happy note, over to Phil in relation to the uses of the petrochemical industry.
Well, I will do, but I'll just say that the young lady who's worried about an overnight stay under Her Majesty's protection herself, she doesn't know what a bank holiday weekend lifted on a Friday long lie-in's all about. Then you get something to complain about, hen. That's not great. Phil, the oil, I've just mentioned 6,000. You can probably tell me there's more than 6,000 items that come from oil.
The list is immeasurable. It's paints, plastics, everything petrochemical orientated. It's been used since time immemorial. It really has in many forms, just burning pitch. But there's so many uses. It's scary. You cannot stop it. It's exceedingly naive. And some of the stuff we're hearing here, there's a couple of key points about this that stick out for me. The headline was North Sea oil and gas licenses will send a wrecking ball through climate commitments. And they quote environmentalists such as from Oxfam as well, and a Tory MP who's a Green Tory MP. But Rishi wants to extract as much oil and gas from the North Sea as possible. And basically, it is the same as Thatcher. It's the go-to saviour when things are looking down, and it's the cash cow when things are going along just tickety-boo. Oil and gas makes a lot of money. It is absolutely critical and essential. I mean, how many of these people are organising these protests using their iPhones and driving their cars? And
most of them are from upper middle class families.
Exactly. If you're serious about this, why don't you give all that up and go and live in a beetroot farm somewhere outside Sunbury? I mean, it's utter nonsense. Rishi went to Aberdeenshire, right, and on Monday, and claimed the move was entirely consistent with their plan to get net zero. If someone says to you, we are going to achieve net zero, you're being conned. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't done your homework. It cannot happen. It's physically, scientifically, pretty much impossible. In Sunak's, one that stuck in the craw was his junior energy minister, Andrew Bowie, described the proposals, right, for the North Sea licensing as maxing out our oil and gas reserves. Now, and obviously that's Britain taking its oil and gas reserves because it controls it while it controls Scotland. But Mike Childs, the head of policy for Friends of the Earth, says climate change is already battering the planet with unprecedented wildfires and heat waves across the globe. Nonsense, Mike. Do your homework. That's not what's causing this. There's a lot of real problems. There's only 100 new licenses out there. I'm a bit concerned about the rapidity, how quickly this has been done, the proximity of some of these fields. They're tapping in. The reservoirs need to be managed properly to get the maximum out of it. And I don't trust the Tories to do that. We should be managing oil and gas reserves wisely, because bear in mind that Norway forecast 131 billion revenue from oil and gas in 2023, a new record. We had the same opportunity, and the oil and gas, the reliance on oil and gas is here to stay, and we have plenty of reserves left. So the Norwegians will add another chunk to their wealth fund of 1.3 trillion. And the serious concerns that I have are manifold, but there's too many assumptions made re climate change, green energy, and the virtue signalling that's been mentioned earlier that goes around with oil and gas. Oh, get rid of oil and gas. Let's play the green energy card. Oil and gas it's essential to play a part in our energy future for the foreseeable future. And green energy can be valuable, but there can be no doubt it's being used to con the punter out of money. Your energy bills, people, are at least twice, if not 3 times higher than they need to be. And they're being used, the subsidies that the government pay, and you pay for through your energy bills, are being used to line the pockets of these new green energy companies and their investors. Follow the money. Look at Al Gore and the con game he's pulled. You've got to be a fool to rely on wind and solar, for example, because of the intermittent nature, as I've said many times, of the power it produces. So, we could go on and on about this. There's so many issues to address here. But one thing's for sure, the Tories are returning to one of their favourite cash cows, which is Scotland's resources, which is the only reason why we continue to be part of the union, because they're making too much money out of us. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, for sure. It's not our charm that they keep us for.
Nope.
That's for sure. Yvonne, what we do know, though, is, I'm no oil expert, however, we've got a general election next year, so the oil will be running out starting in the election year. The price of it will be, you just can't base an economy on it. And the tragedy is, certain people will believe it.
Yeah. When did oil become such a curse? Wars have been
we found
started. Exactly. This is the only country in the world where oil is a curse. And who's ever said to Saudi, your oil is going to be running out by 20 whatever? Nobody says it to Saudi. Who turns around to Qatar, the richest country in the world now, per head of population, because of its gas? Nobody turns around and say, oh yes, but when will it run out? And it just seems mad. And I'm not a climate expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think Phil is right when he's saying that there is no such thing as zero carbon living. And I've got a friend down the road who lives off the grid. She's totally self-sufficient, but she has to think twice before putting a kettle on with the washing machine. That's what living off the grid means. It's a series of compromises. And we've got to try and find a balance. I'm a child from the County Durham coalfields, and I've been brought up surrounded by steelworks, coal mines, shipbuilding, all those industries that provided great jobs with a decent wage. That meant people could go and put bread on the table for their family. and have dignity until Thatcher came along and just destroyed it all. And I know that the same has happened in Scotland. You know, whenever I drive towards Edinburgh or Glasgow, you can see where these communities have existed and thrived. We've got to find a balance. There has to be a balance out there that will keep the green lot happy. And, you know, we all want the planet to survive, for God's sakes. That's a no-brainer. But we can't just cut ourselves off overnight from oil, gas, coal, and other fossil fuels. It can't be done.
No.
And of course, a lot of countries are relying totally on their oil and gas industries and think, why the hell should we just stop all of this just because the West wants us to, when they've plundered all these resources for the last century and got the benefit out of it? Why can't we get the benefit as well? There has to be a balance.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is in Africa, it's actually the chickens are coming home to roost there while the colonialists are all getting booted out. Look, the clock's kicking on. There's one other item I really want to cover. I really want to cover this one. Techie, can you get the Mr. Vine, Jeremy Vine? Now, there you go. On this one, Lloyd, we've just been talking about the oil and gas. There's not a bit of gratitude. There's actually this, this arrogance of looking down their noses at the Celts in particular. But Mr. Vine here on his show thinks that people, anyone in Scotland, in any job, if they're caught discussing independence at their workplace, they should be fired. Have you ever heard such arrogant poppycock? I did well there. Stop that.
Well, it's no surprise coming from the poor man's Jeremy Paxman. You know, the man who failed on Newsnight and ended up on a chit-chat show on ITV. Not the brightest thing to say, but then again, if you're in the business that Jeremy Vine is now in, which has effectively been a television shock jock, you want phone calls, you want controversy. We're talking about it. But the real thing here is I got into an exchange with a bizarre English historian on Twitter earlier this afternoon, and effectively he said much the same as what Jeremy's been saying. You know, we should all be grateful and extremely proud of the fact that we're allowed to be part of this great and wonderful country, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and a little bit of Ireland. It's madness. It's just madness, Rory. But we are firmly part of how you stir up an audience. You know, get the gnats going is a thing, particularly on talk radio, and it's now becoming a thing on talk television as well. Does Jeremy Vine believe that? I wouldn't imagine that he actually does believe it. He does think they should be kept in our box, though, because that's very much what all English public school boys do. And here it is. I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a real journalist? Are we talking about someone who was given a golden path into the BBC and the graduate scheme, and then, you know, he's never really been a real journalist in real terms, like Yvonne or many others that I know. You know, this is about maintaining his career. And, you know, given the things that have happened over the past couple of months with particularly senior presenters at the BBC having clouds cast over them, maybe Jeremy sees a way back in. I don't know. But what's worrying is the response to statements like that. I mean, I remember I spent most of the time when I was listening to media on the run up to to Brexit. I didn't listen to sensible media. I listened to talk radio, LBC, local radio in England, and that's what told me. I knew Brexit was coming because that's what people were saying on the radio. It wasn't what the chit-chat commentators and the bourgeoisie were saying on television and in the nice newspapers. Ordinary folk wanted the Brexit, and in some ways, Jeremy Vine's just appealing to that same lowest common denominator. And in some ways, there's a positive in it. They're still talking about independence more than the National Party is.
That's true. Just a quick story, just to show you what an idiot I am. But I remember I had moved here in 2016, and I was talking to my wife about it. I said, They're not that stupid. They won't vote to leave the EU. What did I know? But Eva, here we are. Another thing that happened this week, on top of this, before Jeremy started spewing his nonsense, they stuck more duty onto whisky again. Another broken promise they wouldn't do it. It's now 75% of the cost of a bottle of whiskey. The biggest goods export we've got in the whole of this wonderful union is now 75% tax. You're going to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs.
That's actually, I think, the biggest tax hike on whiskey in, 40 years. Which says it all. 40 years ago, I probably hadn't drunk a whiskey.
Who are you kidding?
I probably hadn't then. Not that old. But what's really disconcerting about this is that they just don't care. I think they announced this in February or March or something. That's it just come into force. And obviously some of the distilleries are claiming that some of them are going to have to consider their position. There might be redundancies. They might have to close down, etc. Now, in the real world, that's not hugely likely. But it just shows you the cheek of it, that Westminster don't have to think twice and just are so used to slapping a tax on anything that's in Scotland, bleeding Scotland dry every opportunity. They're going to take £80 billion out of the North Sea over the course of the next 5 years at the very least. What are they going to put back? We're going to get in Scotland a fraction of what we contribute to the British economy. We're getting pocket money. That's all it is. And in return for that pocket money, what we continue to see is that we can't do anything about immigration, which we badly need, particularly in the context of seasonal workers and the NHS. We can do nothing about Trident on the Clyde. We're hampered in the context of not being able to have, for example, ports on the east coast and ferry ports in particular, so that we can have passenger transport back directly to Europe again. We've got to use England as a conduit for all of these purposes, and it's completely and utterly wrong. We are the northern outpost. We are the North region. We are North Britain. They don't really consider that we're a country or a nation in our own right. We're an adjunct, but we're a wealthy adjunct available to be bled as and when they feel like it. And, we've these equalities events that we've had in the last few weeks, what has echoed over and over again is this poverty amidst plenty, where we see Scotland's resources actually are phenomenal. Our income is huge. We can power and we can energise and we can heat our country several times over with our own resources and have plenty left to export, sell abroad, etc. But the reality is, we've already said, is a couple of hundred people who were homeless died in Scotland in the last few years. Thousands of Scots were admitted to hospital last year suffering from hypothermia. 240,000 people in Scotland are on housing lists. British gas profits for 6 months was 969 million. We've got record numbers of food banks. We've got baby banks. We've got school uniform banks. We're now renaming food banks. I can't remember what the new posh name is, but obviously it's a euphemism. We're worrying about the NHS. The class sizes in schools, which were to get down to about 20, are now sitting at an average of about 31, 32 pupils per class. The numbers of police officers are becoming controversial again. There's issues about wages, 0 hours contracts, damp houses, not enough affordable housing being built, a myriad of problems that are all unnecessary, because with the benefit of independence simply would be that all of those resources and all of that money is kept in the country, and not only would we look after ourselves properly with different priorities than Westminster currently has, as Phil has alluded to, we could do what the Norwegians did. And we missed out in the 60s, 70s and until now on an oil fund, but we could create an oil fund now. We could create a wind fund now. We could put money in the bank for the rainy days that certainly lie ahead. Instead of that, what you got, that poll that says most of Scotland knows full well that the next 5 years are going to be hell on earth. Well, let's not hang about within the UK for the next 5 years. Get the politicians told. get an electoral event organised, whether it's Scotland United for Westminster or it's an early Holyrood election, and let it get to hell out of this United Kingdom while there's still somewhere worthwhile having and calling home, while we've still got our own resources and it's not a scorched earth that we live in.
Well said, Eva, as always. Last thing to you, my dear friend Yvonne. While we're talking about the whisky going up, you remember during minimum pricing, which has proved to be, has helped a bit. It's part of an overall strategy. The Scottish Whisky Association were going absolutely tonto, although it wasn't affecting them. On this 75% on the bottle of booze, they're remarkably quiet. Another colonised industry.
Absolutely, but you mentioned whiskey, but you also are overlooking the prolific growth of gin distilleries in Scotland as well.
Me overlook gin? You must be kidding.
I want you to think about this, Roddy. Every time you take a sip of Scottish gin or Scottish whiskey, 80% of the money is going on taxes.
Yeah, you're right. I'll just give you a quick example. Sorry to interrupt you. In this country, in Spain, a bottle of Gordon's, a litre bottle of Gordon's, costs me €11, which is what, about 9.5, 10 quid. And it's so, and what is it, 23 to 24 quid back home?
I don't know. I don't drink. Not that that's the solution either, but there you go. I just want to appeal to the people of Rutherglen. You can stop all the madness. You can stop all the madness if you get a Scotland United candidate, somebody that you can trust to represent you, because once the floodgates open, that will be it. You know, Scotland United will be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And even our friends in the ISP, if they just wake up and smell the coffee, they'll see as well that this is the way forward for them to grow as well. You know, the more independence parties we have out there, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't have a downer on the ISP, but they have to be realistic as well. And they have to get in behind Scotland United. And the people of Rutherglen can either do the same and you know, they say the definition of insanity is just making the same mistake and repeating it time and time again. Or they can do something really radical and get behind a Scotland United candidate, because once it starts, it won't stop. So that's something to think about. You know, let's make a difference instead of settling for same old, same old.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, for what it's worth, the Alba Party, LACU, the local in Lanarkshire, when they were asked about whether we should be fighting the election, etc., they said, well, they wanted to wait and see what Margaret. This is someone in another part. They wanted to wait and see what Margaret was doing, and they wanted to know if we could talk Margaret into standing for Alba, and they would back it. And if she stood as an independent, they had already told us they were going to be helping Margaret to fight an election. That's how highly she was thought of. And it is a sad indictment of what's happened in Rutherglen. And Yvonne's right, we need Scotland United. Before we go, just last thing, it was a really big item in this, Yvonne. There was some research done in the baby box, and they found that it really is helping in child development. Have you anything you would like to say to the group before we close?
Yes. Right.
Yeah, we've been waiting all week to do that.
Can we also mention Tommy Sheridan's Hope Not Fear March, which he has now renamed Scotland United, coming up in September, and in George Square. Oh, you're ahead of the curve.
We're ready. We're ahead of you. There you go. Yep.
And so Freedom Square, and they need lots of funds to keep it going. So please help, and I'll be speaking there. So
we like you speaking. We like you speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got to put your speech in first for approval
pure
first
Mary
and anything?
Poppins.
Right, we've run out of time, folks. As always, we've overshot. I do it every week. I hope we can make it. We've done it again. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we enjoy actually bringing it to you. And again, let me thank you all who were so kind coming up at air to say hello, which made me realise there the wind. Geez, it was blowing a hoolie. Give everyone a windmill in Scotland and we wouldn't need any electricity companies. We could generate enough. We had to batten down the old gazebo. Anyway, that's that. We'll see you all soon. And until we do, please, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetic. Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.